Good evening, everyone. You're watching Dangerous Thoughts here on Unsafe Space. I'm Carter Laren, your host. It should be a fun show tonight. Richard Petz already started off with a super chat saying nothing smart to say yet, just trying to show the love. Thank you, Richard. He actually did have something smart to say because before then, he already started with a pun. He said, finally, the Fed finds a way to get its rocks off. Yes, we will talk about the Fed today. It's hard to say that the show is going to be fun and talk about the Fed, but here's the plan. This show involves not only the Federal Reserve, but also rocket ships and asteroids, and old dictionaries, and boobs. So if you cannot wrap your head around the Federal Reserve and understand it with all of this stuff around, like sandwiched around it, there's no hope for you. This is your opportunity. Oops. Sorry, there's a buzzing. I don't know if you heard that. This is your opportunity to to learn about the Fed. Okay. Yeah, on the agenda today, like I said, inflation. We're going to talk about, quote, inflation. I'm putting that in air quotes. Inflation and planetary defense. Those are going to go together. Then I'm going to answer a question from Discord about boob jobs. And then I'm going to quickly talk about the dropesg.com thing that I mentioned last week. So that's the plan today. Please make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube or Utreon or Rumble or Odyssey or wherever you're watching. And it does really help. You know, we don't have NASA's budget, and we're not the Federal Reserve. We can't print money. So we rely on your donations. This show relies on your donations. All the shows rely on your donations. So please head over to unsafespace.com/donate. You can support us on Subscribestar, through PayPal. I think you can actually even do it on YouTube if you want to. So please do that, and also share the content. If there's stuff that you like, please share it. Someone just the other day mentioned something on YouTube about a show that I had forgotten that was a Dangerous Thoughts show that helps explain. I don't even remember what it explained to them. Like, oh, now I understand this thing. A lot of the shows here are evergreen content. We mix in topical stuff so that people want to pay attention, you know, based on the news, but a lot of the content is actually pretty evergreen. So if you're wanting to hear about something, wanting to learn about something, we might have already had some content on it. Let us know and we'll find it, or maybe we'll just make new content. So with all that said, I will take a sip from my Louder with Crowder mug, which I shouldn't be advertising. I should be advertising our grenade mug, which is behind me on the shelf, which you get if you subscribe to this channel at $25 and above. You get a grenade mug, which is super cool. I'm drinking out of another show's mug because that's the kind of horrible marketer I am. All right, let's talk about inflation in air quotes. A couple things I want to do here. I want to help you understand what's happening to the economy right now and what's about to happen to the economy, and we're going to talk about how the usurpation of language, the commandeering of language, or the abolition of language, muddies waters, makes it difficult to think about things, and leads to crises and leads to problems actually dealing with crises. Perhaps some of that's intentional. You never know. So, before we talk about the economy, though, before we talk about inflation in air quotes, this is the bread, the first slice of bread for the sandwich. Before we talk about that, we're going to talk about spaceships. Because being an engineer my entire career, I get super. Look, I know NASA shouldn't be funded. It's not a proper function of the federal government in many ways. I guess if you think the government should do defense, maybe some defense stuff should happen. But NASA's pretty inefficient and horrible. However, you got to put all that aside when you're a nerd and be like, this is cool. This thing is cool. Rocket ships are still really cool. On Monday, NASA performed the first of what they've called a planetary defense test. Actually, SpaceX launched the rocket. But NASA, I think, through contractors that they hired, built the device, which is called a DART, a double asteroid redirection test. This was this rocket. And Monday, during narrative dissonance on Monday, so I had to watch it afterwards. During narrative dissonance on Monday, here's what DART did. There's an asteroid flying around called Didymos. Didymos is like a half a mile long, roughly. It travels between, I don't know, probably somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 miles an hour. I think the speed changes depending on where it is in orbit. But there's this asteroid really far away called Didymos. And around the asteroid that's a half a mile long is another asteroid called Dimorphos. And that one, we measure things in America. For those of you who aren't from America, we measure things in terms of football. So Dimorphos is a football stadium size, is what they were saying. It's football stadium size. So a football stadium size asteroid orbiting this other asteroid, both far away, no threat to Earth because of how far away they are and their trajectories. So how do they even know? When you look far away, you can only see like one point of light. You can't even see the orbiting one. So how do they know there's even an orbiting one there? Well, one of the ways that they detect this is they can see the light from the asteroid, which is obviously just reflection from sunlight. And there's a periodic dimming that happens. And this is how they do it for stars as well. This is how they tell planets around stars. There's this periodic dimming, which is when the thing that's orbiting around it like passes between the asteroid and Earth, right? And it dims. And it happens periodically, so they can measure the period of the orbit, blah, blah, blah. So their test, what they wanted to do was say, okay, can we send this rocket? Can we send the DART? We're going to point it towards this two asteroids that we can't even resolve from Earth, this point of light. And it was NASA and JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab. I've had the opportunity to work with Jet Propulsion Lab people a little bit in like 25 years ago. They're not dumb. There's like really smart people at JPL. So they had some kind of course correcting software going that was like the rocket itself was maneuvering and figuring out where to go. And up until the last 2 minutes or so, it was still course correcting. And at the very end, it stopped course correcting. But the goal was to have this rocket slam into Dimorphos, the football stadium size thing orbiting the asteroid. And why? They want to see if they can change the trajectory. They can change the orbit of that little one. How will they know? Well, if they change the orbit, the period will change. So the frequency with which they see the dimming when they're looking at Didymos, that frequency will change. I think they can't tell yet. They have to wait maybe, I don't know, might even be months before they can kind of tell the drift. And that will tell them, did we move this thing a little bit in its orbit? All very cool if you're an engineer and a nerd. I think it's super exciting. So yeah, but on the front of this DART, the spacecraft, which, by the way, the other method we use other than comparing things to footballs and football stadiums and football fields, apparently we measure things in terms of vending machines, golf carts, and refrigerators. I guess the rocket was one of those three, or the average of vending machines, golf carts, and refrigerator size. That's what we were told. So on the front of this vending machine, there's a camera, and so you can go online and you can watch the rocket approach. You watch the one point of light, and then it resolves into, you can finally see the other asteroid around it, Dimorphos. It's aiming for Dimorphos, and you see it go all the way in, and right up until the end, you get super, super close, and you see the end, and then like you get like partial image because the rocket impacts Dimorphos and blows up. And the rocket itself is traveling like 14,000 miles an hour, hitting this thing, traveling several, at least 10,000 miles an hour, somewhere around there. So bam, you get this impact. And now they're going to measure and see if it worked. So it worked. It hit it. So that worked. Why am I bringing all this crap up? Well, at JPL and at the contractors building this stuff and SpaceX, there's a lot of thinking going on, right? I know that sounds like a trite thing to say, but they're not using a lot of lived experience, right? They're not like, I feel like it's this. There's a lot of rational thinking and lots of use of concepts going on. And the precision of concepts matters a lot to them. They need to know whether they're talking about, linear velocity or angular velocity, or what. Like, they need to know concepts that I probably don't even know, even though I am an engineer. I'm sure there's special astrophysics concepts that I'm not even aware of. So they need to know. And an example is kind of a high school physics example, or junior high school even physics example, is momentum, right? They need to know momentum is your mass times your velocity. Like, that's just a concept. They know that. They know what momentum is. They know what velocity is. They know what mass is. Those are concepts they have to have in their head. They can't even begin to plan a mission without that basic junior high school momentum is mass times velocity. They can't do that. They need that concept. And again, your feelings about momentum don't matter. The lived experience of velocity is not relevant. Like, the concepts need to be clear. And obviously these concepts generally enable thinking, right? The language that we use for something like velocity or momentum, that language is just a label. The language itself is arbitrary, right? I mean, different languages label that different. I don't know what momentum is in Chinese, but it's probably not momentum. But the concept still exists, right? So the label's just a label onto a concept in your brain. And that concept, you need the label, you need the concept, you need that language in order to be able to think. You can't think in concepts, and you have to think in concepts, because your brain, you can only handle like roughly 7 concepts at once in your in your working memory. And so, which I think is the rationale behind 7-digit phone numbers originally. That's about as much as you can kind of work with at one time. So, the world is very complex. You need to be able to break things into concepts so that you can manage that world. You can't really think. You certainly could not put, you couldn't hit an asteroid from Earth without lots of different complex concepts that you can hold in your head and that subsume other concepts. So it's required for thinking. We see this and this is not, I'm not saying anything that you haven't heard. In 1984, for example, the book club books we read early on, they had this concept of newspeak. My daughter just read it recently, and she just brought it up again. She's like, "It sounds like newspeak." Right, the concept of newspeak, which is, one of the goals in this book was to try and change language, actually eradicate words that they didn't want people to have concepts for, and change the language in order to change how people think. I'll read a quote from 1984. There's a lexicologist character named Syme, I think is his name, and he's talking about his latest. He's writing the Newspeak dictionary, and he's talking about his work on the Newspeak dictionary, and he says by 2050, earlier probably, all real knowledge of old speak will have disappeared. The whole literature of the past will have been destroyed. Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, Byron, they'll exist only in newspeak versions, not merely changed into something different, but actually contradictory of what they used to be. Even the literature of the party will change. Even the slogans will change. How could you have a slogan like freedom is slavery when the concept of freedom has been abolished? The whole climate of thought will be different. In fact, there will be no thought as we understand it now. Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness. So, again, without concepts, you can't think about something. So when the language is changed and a concept is abandoned, eradicated, combined with something else, changed in some way. We've talked about the changing definition of racism. That the intent is to change the way you think about this thing. And it will over time. That's what it does, because you have to think in terms of concepts and need labels for those concepts. All right, so let's go back to NASA and JPL for a second. And actually, I want to, before we keep going, we have another super chat from Richard Petz, and I don't want him to have to wait. So he says, I assume they're using fossil fuel to launch these rockets. Shouldn't they switch to something more sustainable? Maybe a giant catapult. Excellent idea. I think we should pass it on to JPL, Richard. Solar powered. Yeah, there's no way for the non-physicist type people, there's no way to exit the Earth's atmosphere. There's no like cool way to do that. You basically have to throw stuff out your butt. Like you have to build something that throws stuff at the Earth and you go the other direction. That's the only way to do it. So usually that's burning some kind of fuel. I mean, it's always burning some kind of fuel. And you're throwing the gases at the Earth. Okay. So back to this NASA JPL thing. Imagine you're at JPL and someone proposes just dropping the concept of velocity. Right? Velocity is speed in a direction, for those of you who are unclear about that. What if we just drop the concept of velocity? We're not going to talk about it. We still have to talk about momentum, because obviously our goal in changing the orbit of this thing is to impart momentum to it. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to hit this asteroid with the refrigerator golf cart size thing. You're trying to impart momentum to it to get it to move. So we still have to talk about momentum, and our goal is still to change the momentum of this thing, the angular momentum of it. But we're not allowed to talk about velocity at all in these. Let's just stop. Let's just not have velocity as a concept. So when momentum changes, I guess we assume it's mass. I don't know what we do. But we're not gonna talk about velocity. We're gonna treat momentum as kind of just mass, and there's some differences. We don't know what we have a word for the velocity part. Now, if you propose this, you'd probably get fired from JPL if you were serious. People would think you are crazy, rightly. And obviously this would be, I mean, you wouldn't have science, you wouldn't have engineering and technology if you could do this kind of stuff. You would fail. You would absolutely fail in your mission to hit the asteroid. And planetary defense would not take the step forward that it has. And someday we'd all die, just like the movie Armageddon. So, oh wait, no, they stopped it in Armageddon. Was it Deep Impact where it actually hit? Wasn't there one where the asteroid actually hit? I don't remember. Anyway, you would fail in your mission. It would be catastrophic, and you would be unable to do anything. And that's how it is when you're dealing with the real world. When you're dealing with science and technology, the results of failure, the results of making a stupid epistemological error, typically present themselves relatively quickly, even in the timeline of, compared to some other stuff we're going to talk about, even in the time of a multi-year or even multi-decade mission, that's pretty quick. You see the result eventually. You build the bridge and ignore some critical concepts and just redefine them, or you pretend 2 + 2 is 5 or whatever. It falls down really quickly. You can't, right away. Unfortunately, when you're mucking with other things, sometimes you don't notice right away. Some of us notice right away and point it out, but the cost of making that error is much more subtle. It can be blamed on other things, and no one seems to notice. And it takes a while to manifest. So now let's talk about the economy. That's your space. That's all we can get for space today. Sorry. Maybe we should just do a show talking about space all the time, but that would be a different show. Richard Petz also, he's down with the super chats tonight. Thank you, Richard. He says Ballistics 101. Yes, Ballistics 101. Actually, if you are a firearms guy, especially if you're into precision rifle, you learn all about this kind of stuff, right? You've got ballistic charts, and the weight of the bullet matters, and actually also the spin matters, but the weight of the bullet matters, and the muzzle velocity matters, and all this kind of stuff matters, and you're calculating ballistics. The difference between a bullet and a rocket, obviously, is the bullet has one single event where stuff gets shoved backwards into your shoulder. And then the projectile moves forward, and a rocket is continuously shoving stuff backwards. Okay, Wind speed, Greg says. You don't worry about wind speed with ballistic tables, but you do worry about wind speed when you're pulling the trigger, absolutely. But you do worry about it with the momentum of the bullet. So wind does affect how much the bullet will move left or right or whatever, but not the drop back to the earth so much. So you're right about that. Okay, enough about guns, enough about rockets. Now we get to talk about the economy, which I know sometimes people think is boring. It's not boring. It's very important. It affects you if you care about, eating. The economy impacts you. Okay. Was it last week? I think it was the 21st. The Fed announced that it had raised the target funds rate. They just say, colloquially, they'll say the Fed raised rates. We'll get into what all that means later. They said that the Fed raised rates. And this was in order to fight inflation. We're going to put that in quotes. Fight inflation. That was the goal of raising rates, or fighting inflation. And in a press conference on the 21st, Chairman Jerome Powell announced this. They raised what's called the funds rate, the target for the funds rate, by 0.75 of a point. We're going to get into what that means in a minute, but so that's what they did. And Chairman Powell stood up. They're typically the Fed chairmen are typically really conservative in their language. Because the market reacts. The market is extremely sensitive to nuance and innuendo and things they say. So Fed chairmen tend to be pretty careful in their word choice, in their language, and what they communicate publicly. I'm not an expert on the Federal Reserve or Fed chairman. From what I can tell, a lot of people on Wall Street seem to think that Jerome is a little bit too loose-lipped and should talk less than he is. But nevertheless, Fed chairmen tend to be pretty careful with their language. So during this press conference, one of the things he said during the Q&A, I'm just going to read this here, and I'll explain it in a minute. He says, so what we've seen is our expectation has been that we would begin to see inflation come down. So they're expecting inflation to come down after what they've already done, because they already raised the rates. Largely because of supply side healing, by now we would have thought that we have seen some kind of that. So he's some kind of like effect on their previous raising of rates. And then he talks about where we are right now in terms of inflation, which we will also talk about, and where we are in the economy. And then he says, after talking about where we are now, he says, that's not where we expected or wanted to be. He blames Ukraine for stuff. Obviously, there's the COVID caused problems. And of course, there's people there asking questions about like, well, is the Fed doing too much? One of the Axios reporters was worried. I forget it was a male or female. It doesn't matter. Zur said, a number of commentators have come into the view, including over at the World Bank. This is like this expert disagrees, that simultaneous global tightening, which means raising of the rates, global tightening around the world creates a risk of global recession that's worse than is necessary to bring inflation down. So this person's like, hey, this is too much. So the Fed chairman's like, I don't know, it hasn't come down. We thought it would come down based on what we've done, so we got to keep doing more because it hasn't come down yet. Probably it's Ukraine because of Russia, and the guy's like, I think you're doing too much. Okay. Lots to talk about inflation. Inflation is a key word here. Inflation is a key word. So maybe we should know what it's like using the word velocity when you're talking about hitting an asteroid. It's a key word. If you don't know what the hell velocity means and you're like, we need more velocity, it's like our magnitude of our velocity is too small, we need to increase it. Like you're like, well, what are you talking about? I don't know what that is. We don't have such a concept, right? So you need to know what is inflation? What are you talking about? It's not, everyone's talking about it. Biden's saying there's not inflation or it's not a big deal, and people saying it's too high. Fed chairman's like, we thought it would come down by now. We're going to fix it. We're fighting inflation. Okay. This is the part where only a certain class of people are going to like this, but that's okay. Here you are. This is the New Century Dictionary. You know what century they're talking about in this dictionary? Not this one. This is the New Century. This is from 1927. This is the 1927 dictionary. They were so excited. We're almost as far along in this century as they were in their century when they released this book. All right, we're going to read inflation. By the way, it's related to the word inflate, like when you like inflate a soccer ball with an air pump. You put more air in it, right? That's where that comes from. Okay. The first definition is to distend with air or gas, blah, blah, blah. So we'll skip that one because it's not the one we're looking at. Oh, actually it is. At the end. Also, here we go. I'm looking at the wrong. That was wrong. Inflation. The act of inflating. Okay, that's the part we're skipping. Or the state of being inflated. Specifically, an expansion or increase of the currency of a country by the issuing of paper money, especially paper money not redeemable in specie or insufficiently secured by precious metal. Oh, it's cute that they wrote this back when there was metal back in currency. Isn't that cute? Inflation was and has always been an expansion of the money supply. It's an expansion of the money supply. That's what it is. It's not rising prices. Rising prices are a result of inflation. Right? Prices can rise for other reasons. People can just raise their prices. But inflation itself is the expansion of the money supply. And if you don't allow that concept to continue to exist, if you drop that concept and you call inflation something else, or you assign a new definition to it, you've lost the concept you need to really look at the thing you're doing, which is increasing the money supply. Today, 2022, if you look up on Investopia, which is the kind of a default place for a lot of monetary or financial terms, it says inflation is a rise in prices, which can be translated as the decline of purchasing power over time. Now, they didn't totally get rid of the old definition. They now say, well, there's different types of inflation. In the old definition, they've called this demand pull inflation. Okay, fine. But you don't hear people talking about the problem with demand pull. That's not what they're talking about. They're just saying it's inflation. Inflation's the problem. And what they've done by redefining inflation, and if you were a crazy person like me, I would have been in 1927 jumping up and down. Probably, I don't know if Mises jumped up and down, but like people like that would have been jumping up and down and saying, hey, stop redefining this. I don't know actually when the redefinition happened, but it's the expansion of the money supply. We need that concept. That concept needs to stay. You can't usurp the concept. You can't change the concept. Prices going up is a different thing. It can be largely driven by expansion of the money supply, which is inflation, but it's a different thing. We need to maintain these concepts. Apparently, either people didn't argue hard enough or no one cared that they were arguing. So the result is we've muddied the waters here with respect to what we're talking about, right? And that muddies the waters with respect to cause and effect. Like what's causing what? What are we talking about? So when the Fed says they're fighting inflation, what do they mean? When you watch CNBC or CNN and they say inflation's a problem, what do they mean? They mean the rise in prices. They're not talking about the thing. I mean, sometimes on CNBC they do because they're Wall Street guys and like they all know this, right? They'll be like, well, it's printing of the money. Right? It's the expansion of the money supply. They know this. The Fed knows this. Chairman Powell knows this. I would say basically everyone on Wall Street knows this. Everyone knows. All the financial people know this. They know They know what's going on. They know why prices are rising. They know it's because of an increase in the money supply. And if you, by the way, if you don't understand why that happens, that's just a simple supply and demand, right? You've got more dollars out there, same amount of stuff. The dollars get divvied up with the stuff. Like, okay, so each thing that you're selling now is more. It includes labor and McDonald's hamburgers, right? So prices inflate, right? You need more dollars to get things because you've got more dollars in circulation. Now, of course, the gold standard, by the by, the gold standard made it really difficult to achieve monetary inflation because you needed gold to back the money. So more money meant you have more gold. So it wasn't a problem. But now it doesn't mean that. Thank you, Richard Nixon. So why are they not? They all these guys know this. Jerome Powell knows this. Why is he not standing up and saying? Why is he saying, "Well, Ukraine, blah blah"? Why is he not standing up and saying, "Hey, guys, the problem's really this demand pull inflation problem. We expanded the money supply way too much, and we got to fix that. That's the problem. That's what happened." Why are they not communicating? Because they know. They don't not know. This I'm not. No one. None of them are going to watch this and go, "Oh my God, he's saying things I didn't know." They all know this. So why are they communicating to the public in a way where they don't talk about this at all? The answer is not that they're doing this for clarity. They're not trying to be clear. That's not the answer. They don't think it's more clear to talk about Ukraine and use the word inflation to mean increased prices and not bother to talk about increased money supply. They're not trying to be clear. Which begs the question, are they trying to be unclear? Yeah. What we're seeing here, and once you see this once you start seeing this, you see this everywhere. We are seeing, and I've talked about this before, but we are seeing the reintroduction of a nobility class. One of the mentalities of the elites, and frankly, the fact that the Kardashians have a popular television show does give me a little bit of sympathy for this viewpoint. I understand where they're coming from. The elites look out and they say, well, these people are imbeciles. I mean, just look at some of the stuff that's popular. Look at the choices they make. Look at these morons. That's how they view people, right? And they say someone needs to take charge of humanity here and drive us in a direction that's the right way. And we're smart. True, they are. We're smart. They're also immoral. We'll fix it. So they have this idea that they will be some sort of nobility class, that there will be the people in charge and there will be the peons. And the peons really just need to be, they don't need the truth. They need to be told whatever it is they need to be told to get them to behave in the way they want. That's why no one wanted to have discussion about the efficacy of certain pharmaceuticals. You just needed to be told, trust the science. No one wants to have a discussion about the complexities of expanding the money supply and what's really happening. You just need to be told, like, things are going to be hard. We're going to raise interest rates because don't worry, we're fighting that bad thing called inflation. Don't worry about what that is. It just means prices go up. Just the thing you don't like, we're taking care of it for you, right? This is how they view people generally, and it's obviously elitist. It's immoral, but it's not abnormal, right? This is how society has been for, America is an anomaly. I've said this before, right? But you had, in pre-revolutionary France, you had the three estates. You had the clergy, and the nobility, and everyone else. And since in America, we have not had that. In America was intended to be a place without those three estates. It's not It's not like Europe. People aren't as class conscious in America, or they haven't been necessarily. And so, you get this kind of, I want to say egalitarian. It's not actually egalitarian, but you get this kind of classless. You get upward mobility. You get a middle class. They don't like it. They're people who have made it to the top in some way, and they want to stay there. And they view themselves as the elites, and they view you, just by virtue of the fact that you're not one of them, as a farm animal, livestock, to be taken care of, to be given the health care that you need, whether you know it or not, fed what you need, whether you know it or not, whether whether you like it or not. And they just need to learn some magic words to placate you. The language specificity isn't important for you because you're just being sold propaganda. That's why they're not talking about this. It's not that they're dumb. It's not that Jerome Powell doesn't understand what's going on here. So, you're going to understand after this show basically what's going on. That's the goal. We're going to explain the Fed right now. We're going to explain what the Federal Reserve is and what its relationship is to the United States government. Now, you might say, I don't care, this doesn't matter, in the same way that you'd be like, I don't care about physics, stop talking about momentum, it's thinky talk, right? Well, if you were living on Dimorphos and the rocket was headed at you, you better well care about momentum and rocket science. And in this case, you are living in a world in which these elites are manipulating the economy. So if you care about how to pay for your food, if you like eating, you want to pay for medical bills, you want to be able to find work, you care about the life that your kids will have economically, if you want to afford your house or your apartment, pay for your children to exist or maybe go to school, save for retirement, you should care. This matters. This matters a great, great deal. So you got to understand this. You got to understand the relationship between the Federal Reserve and the United States government and the economy generally. So here we go. Problems before this, but 1913 is where we're going to start. It's one of the worst years in American history. One of the worst presidents in American history, Woodrow Wilson. It's the year that we passed, or I guess ratified, the 18th Amendment, which made income tax, I think it's the 18th, income tax constitutional. I might be wrong on the number. But one of the reasons it is one of the absolute worst years is it ushered in the creation of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the central bank of the United States. This is something that Hamilton and Jefferson argued over at the founding. No surprise, Hamilton, douchebag, big government Hamilton, wanted a Federal Reserve, wanted a big central bank. Jefferson didn't. Fast forward, 200 years, the leftists make plays about Hamilton and how awesome he is. So in 1913, Hamilton got his way. There was some attempts at this earlier, but 1913, Hamilton gets his way. Long dead, but happy about it, I'm sure. We get the creation of the Federal Reserve. Then now, I'm not going to talk about the gold standard, but the Federal Reserve, the creation of the Federal Reserve is it was the removal of one of the pillars of our currency. It made way for, it cleared obstacles for removing the gold standard. So, Federal Reserve, they're the central bank of the United States. What do they do? What's their charter? People had tried the income tax before. By the way, I see chat. People had tried the income tax before. There was income taxes for wars, but they were then repealed. I think some of them were struck down as unconstitutional. So the income tax system that we're today, we did not have the income tax system until 1913. And I should put up, I think there's been a couple super chats that I've missed before I get deeper into this. I don't want people to feel left out. Let's see. Keith the Hat Guy says, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed and signed into law. I don't know why you are talking about this. Inflation is already low, wasting time. Well, good point, Keith. Good point. Biden fixed it. So I don't know. What am I bitching about? Richard Peth says their definition of inflation requires a good dose of conflation. See, Richard, you've got the wordplay today. Richard's got the wordplay going on. He is right. We should just call it conflation. Anyway, so 1913, Federal Reserve gets created. Think of the Federal Reserve as, think of the federal government's got you go to a bank. You have a checking account at a bank. You got a savings account at a bank. If you need banking services, you go to a bank, right? Who does the Federal Reserve, who does the federal government go to? Where do they go? Well, that is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, one of their charter things is they do banking services for the U.S. government, for the Treasury. The Treasury keeps its checking account at the Federal Reserve. When you pay your taxes, shame on you. But if you do pay your taxes, that check that you write or the money that they steal from you against your will while you're working, that goes into their account at the Treasury's account at the Federal Reserve. It's their account. Think about the Federal Reserve as like, this is the bank for the Treasury, for the U.S. government. So that's one of the things they do. They have supervisory and regulatory power over a bunch of financial institutions. We won't get into that. They are responsible generally for the stability of the financial system, which I find hilarious because oddly enough, I don't see. I've seen historical charts for like the Dow Jones or the top 30 U.S. stock, U.S. 30 or whatever, that date back to the late 1800s. And just by eyeballing it, it doesn't really look like there was a lot of volatility until after the creation of the Federal Reserve. But I've not seen anyone actually pull that data down and do like a variance calculation to actually see what it is. But I think they would be hard pressed to demonstrate that they've actually made our financial system more stable. Within 16 years of their creation, we had 1929. So I don't know how stable they are. So that's one of their charters. And the last part of their charter we're going to talk about is, or one of their features of their charter, the last mandate here is the one we're going to talk about. And this is a price stability mandate. And actually it's called the dual mandate since 1977. There's been this dual mandate, and they are supposed to optimize for price stability, and also they're supposed to promote employment. Now, those two things are sometimes at odds with each other, so it's not clear what they're supposed to pick. But kind of their modus operandi has been to say, we're going to target about 2% inflation. Again, what they mean by inflation is price inflation. We're going to target 2% price inflation. We think, I guess it takes PhDs in economics to figure out why this is, but we think 2% inflation a year is the right amount. That's the sweet spot for the economy. Now, they are paranoid of deflation. Deflation is when prices fall. Now, you might ask, why would you be afraid of deflation? Like, if you went out to buy a new car and it was cheaper now than it was last year, wouldn't that be good? Wouldn't that be good for you? Wouldn't everyone kind of like price deflation? And yeah, maybe your wages would also go down commensurate eventually with it, because wages are prices as well. But like, what's the big deal? What's the problem with deflation? Well, the modern economists will tell you that what's the problem with deflation, what they're worried about, is that falling prices lead to lower consumer spending. Now, that's not actually true in an absolute sense. If you were going to buy a TV and the price is lower, you still buy the TV. Even if, let's say your wage goes down and the price of the TV goes down and you buy the TV, you're still buying the TV. What goes down is the number that they're recording in their little book, that the way that they measure the it's retarded. The way that they measure the health of the economy is through consumer spending in dollars. So, of course, that goes down. If everything costs less, you have to spend less. Therefore, it looks like the economy is getting worse because you're not spending more, and they're measuring spending. When you get what you measure. So we now have an economy where there's very little savings, because we measure where we care about spending. Spending is not production. Spending is the opposite, basically, of production, unless you're spending it on capital equipment or some productive thing. But spending is not, no one gets rich by charging shit on their credit card. Like you don't go to Costco to get rich. You go to Costco to buy the stuff you need. You consume. That's why it's called consuming. Producing is the opposite of consuming. So we're in this financial system where we measure the health of the economy through consumption, thanks to Keynes. I think he's responsible for that shift. And so they're very concerned because, well, the health, put in quotes, the health of the economy goes down if we have deflation because the numbers on my piece of paper go down. It doesn't mean your life is worse off. It doesn't mean standard of living is lower. Actually, it might be higher. But hey, we don't care. So they're very concerned about deflation. So they've got to make sure they like a little bit of inflation. I don't even know why the 2% number is there. It doesn't matter. They got a 2% goal. So sometimes inflation is not 2%, and they need to change it. They need to fix it. Sometimes they want it up. Sometimes they want it down. Okay, so what are the tools? So the Federal Reserve is this bank. Let's get back to what they are. They got a mandate, remember, banking services for their government, some regulations, stability of the financial system, and this last one is price stability. They've been trying to keep prices stable, and by stable they mean 2% increase every year. That's newspeak for stable. So this is their goal. 2%. So what do they do? How do they possibly do this? They're sitting there running the Treasury's checking account. How the hell do they do this? What are the tools that the Federal Reserve has in their arsenal? What can they do? And by the way, the Federal Reserve is not a private bank. It is, people sometimes say it's like kind of private. It's not private. It reports to Congress. It was created by Congress. It reports to Congress. The only thing private about it is it doesn't rely on Congress for funding. So it makes its own money through basically banking fees, right? It makes its own money, but it has to it's allowed to have a certain amount of profit, but it's supposed to return the rest to the Treasury. So it's not supposed to be a money-making thing directly. I'm sure there's a lot of grift that goes on and revolving doors between the Federal Reserve and large financial institutions. That's a separate issue. But the Federal Reserve is a government body. It's a government entity. And the idea, it's semi-detached, and right, Congress has oversight of the board of the Federal Reserve because the idea was they don't want Congress just making financial decisions all the time because it will be politically driven. So the idea was, well, we need them to be a little bit of independent. We'll have a board of governors, and that's how they'll report to Congress, and we can control that. But we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of what they're doing every quarter. We're not going to tell Jerome Powell what to say when he gets in front of cameras. So that's the idea behind the Fed. So what are the tools? What can the Fed do? They're running the checking account for the Treasury. Big whoop. That doesn't mean they can do anything. What else can they do? They got three main tools in their arsenal here. The first one is they set what's called a reserve requirement for banks. When you are a bank, you've got to keep a certain percentage of the money that you have deposited. You have to keep a certain percentage of it at the Federal Reserve. Or I think you can also keep it in cash. But basically, you have to keep it at the Federal Reserve. It's got to be reserved. You got to keep it there. So you can't lend all of it out. All right? You can't lend all of it out. You got to keep some amount in cash to prevent runs on banks and whatever, right? That's the idea. So you got to keep some with the Federal Reserve. They've got some of the cash. They can set what that requirement is. They can say, well, you have to have 10% of your cash in with us, or your deposits. Or you have to have 3% of your deposits. Now, when banks lend money out, Like if a bank has $1 billion, right? If they can lend out 900 million of that, right? Then you've got 900 millions of dollars worth of loans going out in the economy, right? And you've got the economic activity associated with $900 million. And that would be a 10% reserve requirement, because 10% of it would be not allowed to be loaned out. Now the Federal Reserve can change that. So if they say, well, 5% now has to be, you can. So now they can loan another 50 million, right? All right, yeah. Now they can loan another. They got another 5% that they can loan out. So now you get that increased economic activity. Or the Federal Reserve can say, actually, now you have to have 20% on reserve. So now instead of loaning out 900 million, they can only loan out 800 million, and they've got to keep the rest in the Federal Reserve. So they can adjust that rate, or that requirement allows them to kind of let there be more lending in the economy, or pull back the amount of lending that banks do in the economy, right? So that's one tool they have in their toolbox. And obviously lending and lending, by the way, is the creation of money. So this is also maybe a concept that people don't always understand. If you deposit $100 into your bank, right? They give you basically an IOU. You can log into your bank and you can see I have $100 in there, but it's not there. It's not all there. Let's say they're lending out 90 of it. That means they've lent 90 of it to someone else. Now, you gave them $100. Let's say they lent all of it, just to make it easy. You gave $100. If they lent out the $100, so someone else now has the $100, but you still have in your balance still says you have $100. And now they actually have 100. Their balance is $100. They just lended it from the bank. The bank lent it to them. So now there's $200 in existence, where there was only $100 in existence before. So lending creates money in that sense, right? So if the Federal Reserve wants more money to be created, one of the things that they can do if they want to increase the money supply is they can lower the reserve requirement. If they want to reduce the money supply, they can increase the reserve requirement. And when banks, there's a period, I don't remember when it is, I don't know if it's once a month or once a quarter or whatever, once every 2 weeks, the bank has to reconcile. They have to look at their deposits, and they have to say, do we have enough on reserve with the Fed? And if they don't, they either have excess or they have not enough, right? If they don't have enough, and they need to fix that. They need to fix it by borrowing. They need to go get some more, right? They need to go get some more Federal Reserve money. They need to get some more money in their account. They need to borrow it, basically. They need Fed funds. So they can go out and they could get it directly from the Federal Reserve. And they do that. There's something called the discount rate. They can borrow it from the Federal Reserve, and then the Federal Reserve charges a discount rate. But normally what they do is they just borrow it from other banks who happen to have an excess. And when they do that, that's the Fed funds rate. That's the rate at which they borrow from other banks. So it's kind of complicated how they get this, but that's the Fed funds rate. The Fed funds rate is not directly controlled by the Federal Reserve, but we'll talk in a minute about how it kind of is. So that's where they can get that money. So that's what the bank has to do. The reason we're talking about how banks get money is now we're on the second tool in the Federal Reserve arsenal. The second tool is they can change the discount rate. This is the rate at which they lend money to banks who need more in their reserve account, right? It generally is uncommon to change the discount rate. I mean, less common than other things the Federal Reserve does. Again, if they want to, that rate indicates how loose the Federal Reserve is with money. If they're charging a lot of interest, then they're not loaning it very easily. If they're charging very little interest, then they're very loose with money. Then it's easier and they're loaning more. So, these open market interest rates that banks pay between each other is the Fed fund rate, but the discount rate is what they pay from the Fed, right? So, or what the Fed charges. So if they get it from the Fed, they get charged a discount rate. So the Fed can change that if they want to. And the last thing, which is I think the most common thing the Federal Reserve does, the last tool in their arsenal, and the most common tool, is they can adjust their balance sheet. And that basically means they can buy assets. And it's important to understand how they buy assets. So I'm actually going to pull this up. We're going to look at, let's see, share the screen. Bear with me, guys. This is important stuff. I know it's a little bit complicated. Okay. Here's the current as of September 21st. This is called the System Open Market Account Holdings of domestic securities. They have foreign currencies as well, but this is basically the assets of the Federal Reserve. And what they do is if they want to increase the amount of currency in the system, they want to increase credit. They want to, in the language of the old New Century Dictionary, if they want to inflate the money supply, they want to create more money. Remember, they can inflate the money supply by doing those other two things we talked about, right? The discount rate and the reserve requirements. But the most common thing they do to inflate the money supply, which is also called, if you heard quantitative easing, you've heard that term in the past several years, same thing. They buy securities from the government, from the Treasury. Well, not directly from the Treasury, but they buy Treasury bills, Treasury notes, Treasury bonds. Those are all kind of the same thing. They're named differently depending on how they're bought and sold and how long they mature. But basically, they're government loans. So the government needs money, and it's like, this is, we'll give you X amount a year if you lend us this much money so that we can pay for whatever Bernie Sanders wants or whatever it is the government needs money for. So people buy these Treasury bills, Treasury notes, Treasury bonds. And what the Federal Reserve can do, and if you see in this chart, the Federal Reserve has a bunch. They've got, look, U.S. Treasury notes and bonds, they've got $4.8 trillion on their balance sheet. They also, by the way, have some other stuff. They started buying, I think this is recent, but I'm not an expert. They started buying mortgage-backed securities that were backed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So they got like 2.7 trillion of those sitting here, right? And in total, their Soma holdings, Soma, again, remember, is the System Open Market Account Holdings. The Soma holdings total is $8.29 trillion. So how do they buy these, and how does this create money? Well, it's exactly how you would love to buy things. What they do is they go to a bank that has, let's say they want $100 billion worth of treasury notes. They go to a bank that's got one of these, and they say, we'll take those, and we'll type some numbers into your Federal Reserve account, and voila. Thank you very much. We just purchased them. That's what we did. So they literally just credit dollars into the bank, because that bank has a reserve account at the Fed, right? So they just they type it in, and hey, we paid you. The end. And that's it. Now, of course, that bank then takes that money, which has just been newly created, and they can use it to fund other banks. When other banks are low on their Federal Reserve requirements, whatever, they can, and they loan it at the Fed fund rate. So they loan it to other banks, and that's how that money gets in the system. It helps to be at the top of the system, right? Because they get access to that money before prices have gone up. So eventually, obviously, prices will rise because you've just inflated the money supply at that point, right? So that's how they inflate the money supply. They literally just like, thank you for the treasuries, type it in. Now we've credited your account. We just, boop, we made money out of thin air. That's what they do. They're authorized to do that. That's what they do. Now, if they want to decrease the money and credit that's in the system, they just do the opposite. they take their treasuries and they say, here, Chase Bank, you get these, and we're going to deduct this from your reserve account. So now Chase can't loan that money because they have to, their deposits have to actually be reduced, right? Because their reserve amount has been reduced, right? So like they've just destroyed money and they've pulled back the money supply in the system. That's the most common way that the Federal Reserve mucks with our financial system. So when they talk about quantitative easing, it's when they're buying those treasuries and just typing stuff in to the bank's account at the Federal Reserve. Okay, so what's going on in the economy now? So that's all background. You should understand. Before we move on, does anyone have questions? Does anyone have questions about what we've just gone over? I'll wait. Okay. It doesn't look like anyone has any big questions. All right. So, what's going on in the economy today? What is the state of the economy? What are we doing? Well, let's first talk about inflation in air quotes. And instead of just talking about it, let's take a look at this chart. Here is I should probably make this bigger. Now this is the consumer. This is urban consumers, but the CPI, Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers. This is from like 1950 to today, right? Now, when people say inflation, colloquially, they don't mean actual money inflation that we've just talked about. They mean a rise in basically the Consumer Price Index. So people say, well, current inflation is 8.26% as of August, I think, right? That's high. That's more than 2. That's bigger than 2. And that's basically the CPI. If we look at, we can zoom in on this a little bit and look more recently. You can see that in 2020, like right at the beginning of 2020, there was a little dip in prices, and then they've been rising pretty steadily ever since. And they kind of flattened since June, July this year a little bit, but I guess not enough. The Fed was saying it's not working. So this is the inflation that everyone's talking about. Air quote inflation. This rise is a rise in prices. So that's where we are. Like I said, the current inflation rate is, I guess the last one was 8.26% in August. Now, that's the Consumer Price Index. The inflation rate is actually slightly, I mean, like I said, the Consumer Price Index is not exactly the inflation rate, but kind of the inflation rate. I will just show you the Consumer Price Index. You'll see that they're basically the same. I mean, they're not exactly the same. One's based on the other one, but here's the inflation rate. Right, it's very similar, and you can see also this goes from like 2000, looks like 2018 roughly, to currently, and 2020 was down here. It's been going up. So this is the quote inflation rate, which again is not money inflation. They're using this language, United States inflation rate. It is not the inflation like we would think about it. It is increase in prices. It's rise in prices. That's what that is. So. No, hold on. Richard Petz has got something else to say. We'll take a moment and So Richard says, thank you, Richard. He says, take a look at the yen and how they're selling off the U.S. treasuries. Ditto the UK, only with them it's their own treasuries. Currencies being devalued. SHIF, which I think we can all guess what that means. It begins with an expletive. I think, maybe not. I'm not sure what actually, I was thinking SHTF. I don't know what SHIF. Anyway. Yes. So I'm not going to get into like other currencies, but there's the dollar is the reserve currency. A lot of companies, Japan and UK, I think, own a lot of treasuries as well, so they can affect all this. But and the United States is kind of in a nice position, frankly. I mean, we can be affected by other countries, but also the dollar is the reserve currency, so other people are doing worse, mostly right now. Anyway, Richard says it was SHTF. Okay. So, like I said, this the chart we just looked at was a rise in prices, not inflation, but it's called inflation. We put it in quotes. Now, Powell can now talk about rising prices, which is what he's actually talking about, without even acknowledging actual inflation, because you can't say you're not talking about inflation because that's the word he's using, but he's not talking about inflation. He can talk about COVID. He can talk about Ukraine. He can talk about the supply chain. But of course, everyone, like I said, everyone on Wall Street, they know the underlying main cause. I actually heard someone on CNBC mention it today. They're like, well, I think they used the phrase printing money, right? They know what actual inflation is, but that's not what's being communicated. They know, but politicians don't know. Elizabeth Warren's like, it's corporate greed that causes inflation. She means rise in prices. Paul Krugman is similarly Nobel Prize in economics. I think his Nobel Prize was in getting everything that he's ever predicted wrong. But he's like, it's corporate greed too. Like, he's on the Elizabeth Warren bandwagon. And I finally found this TikTok video that I had lost, which I think is great. Here is someone, I forget this guy's TikTok account, but he's cool, and he just goes around and like he's just asking people in DC, politicians in DC, what inflation is. Let's see what they say.
This is inflation.
So sorry, his question here is what causes inflation, and that's Eric Swalwell. He, I think, doesn't answer.
No answers. Nobody knows. Can you tell us what causes inflation?
This is Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, and then Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm reading this for people who are only listening. From Georgia, Republican.
Too much government spending. I like it.
Price.
So she says too much government spending. The other guy didn't say anything. I think this is Ayala Presley. I'm not sure. She's about to tell us that it's price gouging from corporations. Let's see.
Gouging from corporations.
Price gouging from corporations.
Tributes.
What else?
Conflicts abroad.
Conflicts abroad?
Yeah.
Anything else?
I think that's it for now.
Do you think the American people want an academic discussion on inflation, or would they rather know that we're doing something to lower costs for everyday Americans? What do you think?
This guy's an asshole. His name is Hakeem Jeffries, and because he doesn't know the answer, he says, do you think the American people would rather us talk about have an academic, it's thinky talk. Do they want a thinky talk discussion, or do they want to know something? They want to know we're doing something to help. How can you do anything to help if you can't have the conversation? You're like, it's like saying, you go to your doctor and you're like, what's wrong with me? I don't know, but do you want me to help? Because I'll inject some shit into you if you want. Like, you don't know. You can't help if you don't know. This guy clearly doesn't know, and he's hiding behind arrogance to answer. Okay, let's keep going.
What do you think?
I want to hear. What are you doing to lower costs, sir? What do you think? What causes inflation, Congresswoman?
This is Katie Porter, Democrat from California.
Will you tell us?
She doesn't want us to know.
Tell us. He's only thinking about his stride and his
That
form.
guy's
No
running
thoughts
away.
on economic issues at this time.
I love that guy's ran away. He's running away. I don't want to. Don't make me talk about inflation. So our lawmakers don't know what the hell it is. Yeah, Richard, I know you're a doctor. The lawmakers don't know what it is, and we don't. Most of the public doesn't know. I mean, I don't have to play videos about how poorly the public answers basic questions like, where's New Jersey on a map? So I'm sure they don't understand this either. So why don't they want to talk about inflation of the money supply, right? And let's stop using this word inflation to mean rising prices. So let's ask, what is behind the rising prices? Let's look, what's the state of the economy? Where are we? What has happened in recent years? Why might prices be rising? Without asking Elizabeth Warren if it's like there's a rise. I don't know if there's a rise, like there's a greed chart. I know one thing she says is, well, they have profits. Profits are good, not bad, unless you're Elizabeth Warren, in which case she thinks they're immoral. Profits are actually moral in a free market. But in Elizabeth Warren's mind, profits are bad. Now, I don't know if she's got a little graph that shows like, look, greed has gone up. Maybe she does. But let's look at other stuff that might have gone up. Things that might matter. Let's see here. First thing we're going to look at is something called M2. Now, there are various ways to measure the supply of money in the United States. Now, in the previously, I have shown an M1 graph for this. I shouldn't have that. Well, I'll get into this in a minute. This is M2. If you look at it from, this is the basically money supply. This is a way to measure money supply. This goes from 1959 all the way through current day. You can see there's a nice little, nice in quotes, nice little rise of this, kind of looks like the beginning of a exponential rise, actually. It's kind of rising all the way up until 2020, at which point, boom. We get to way back in 1959, we're at about, what is this, $286 billion in circulation. By 2020, we had got ourselves up to $15 trillion in circulation because we haven't been good at this for a long, long time. And of course, somewhere, I think it was in the 60s or 70s. Was it 70s? Nixon, 60s, I guess, 67. I think Nixon took us off the gold standard. So that helped. So here we go. So in March of 2020, we're at 15.98. Oh, sorry, here. Let's do February. At 458 trillion dollars in circulation. And then you can see here, there's this big spike. Boom. We go up to 18 trillion right away. And then we've really quickly, by January of this year, we've gotten to 21.69 trillion. So this is, 15 to 21. We're talking about, what's that, a $6 trillion jump. Now, if you look at M1, this jump is actually huge. It's like 20 trillion or something. I should not have shown that as an example last time because the M1 graph, the reason that jump is there is it's a technical reason that's not real. The Federal Reserve changed the rule for whether money market accounts should be measured in M1 or not. So it's a measurement change, right? But M2 includes M1 plus other stuff. So M2 is the more comprehensive, better measurement here. You still see this spike. It's not 20 trillion, but it's $6 trillion over a couple of years. It's huge, right? It's a huge spike. Unlike everything before, right? If you're, it's kind of a slope, and then suddenly, boom, we really changed trajectory here in 2020. And obviously we know why that is. That's, well, I won't say why it is. You can guess why it is. You can guess why that might happen at that time. And this is actual inflation. So if someone says what is inflation? This chart is inflation. That's what inflation is. Here's the money supply. There's more of it now. That's inflation, right? Now the question is, what are the things that caused this? Why do we have more? Well, there's three things that cause this inflation. And we're going to go through them. Three reasons that we have this monetary inflation. Let's see. I'll pull up the first one. Wish I was faster. I don't know how to be faster at screen sharing. Maybe I'm just impatient. Where is this? Sorry, guys. Here it is. Here's a chart of the national debt. Pretty straightforward. Also depressing. So this goes from 1920s. We're down, I don't know what this number is. It's not actually saying, but it's maybe a half a trillion less, maybe, I don't know, 200 billion, something like that. Okay, so here we are. And, you know, it goes up, blah, 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 blah. It's been going up and helps with that. And it goes up, and if we go to 2020, which is right around here, you see, again, just there's kind of a shift, kind of shoots up dramatically. Because spending, debt, right? So this is government spending. This is the government spending money. This is the debt that they're going into. So if you look at fiscal year, the end of fiscal year 2019, we're at $24.3 trillion in debt, and we jumped up to 28.4. So what's that, $5 trillion basically? $5 trillion just in spending. Just in spending. So that's a big part of that $6-something trillion jump we saw before. So that's one thing. That's one thing that happened. Okay. What's another thing that happened? Well, remember I said that the Fed could control discount rates. But I said they don't do that very often. This is the rate that the Federal Reserve will charge banks for borrowing money in order to maintain their reserve requirements. Right? Well, let's take a look at that. Discount rates. Discount rates have been all over the place historically, but here, after 2020, where they went to the historical low. This says 0.25. It was a window. It was between 0 and 0.25%. So that's why you heard people say it was reduced to 0. It's a quarter point window. It was reduced to between 0 and 0.25. So that's the interest rate. And by the way, that's a discount rate. That's the rate that the Fed charges you to borrow money if you're a bank. That's still down there. It hasn't changed as far as I know. I don't think that's changed. This chart doesn't say it's changed. So that's something that's different. By the way, the other thing they did, which you don't have a chart for, is they also lowered the reserve requirement to 0. You don't have to keep any money in with the Fed if you don't want to. So that's a big deal. But the last thing they did here, I guess I said there was 3, maybe there's 4 if we throw in that they lowered the reserve requirement. The last thing they did was, remember how I said if they wanted to buy something, they wanted to buy securities. And remember I said buying securities creates money, right? Because what do? They take the security from the bank and they just type it in your bank account. Here's the money, right? Well, let's take a look at how much securities they've owned. This is from 2008 till now. You can see in 2020, they went from having total assets of $3.76 trillion to $8.9 trillion. That's quite a jump. They bought a lot of assets. The Fed balance sheet is huge, or that side of the balance sheet, the assets, huge compared to where they were, right? So that is a creation of money. They injected all this money into the economy, and remember that money then was used to lend out and create more money. So there's a follow-on effect there. And we looked at this. We looked at that SOMA thing before, the System Open Market Account. That's what this balance is. This is the sum of all those things: treasuries, notes, mortgage-backed securities, all the stuff that they hold. All right. So that's That's what that is. That's what that is. All right. So I think the question we should be asking here, which we can't ask because we don't have the right language, but the question we shouldn't be what's causing inflation, right? That's a very clear answer. I just showed you. Politicians spent too much money, and the Federal Reserve has been injecting money into the economy in a couple different ways. That's what caused inflation. The end. It's not rocket science. And everyone on Wall Street knows that. Jerome Powell knows that. They all know that. That's what caused price inflation. Because that's what inflated the money supply. That's it. Now, in some ways, it's the Federal Reserve's job to clean up after the government's mess. Right? Prior to the removal of the gold standard, the government couldn't just borrow money. They couldn't have this creation of money scheme because money had to be backed by gold. You couldn't just type done, right? So you couldn't have this. But the Federal Reserve, now, you could say in some ways it's their job to clean up after the mess of Congress. Congress overspends. They screw up the economy in other ways. They could spend too much, they could tax too much, they could add regulations that stifle business, whatever Congress can do. The government can really screw up the economy in a lot of ways, and it's the Federal Reserve's job to clean it up according to their standards, which I don't necessarily agree with, but that's their job. The problem is they're also good at making messes. So cleaning it up, they're bad at cleaning it up. So they're like a 5-year-old who takes a dirty cloth and rubs the clean counter. I'm helping, right? So they're not helping, but that's their job. It's to kind of clean up after the mess that the government makes. The Fed is basically an enabler, right? So, the government can crush the economy in a million different ways. The Fed's job is to fix it. But often what they do, first of all, they're targeting weird things like, we need 2% inflation all the time, and they do these things where we're just gonna, print money like there's no tomorrow, and that's how we got into the mess that we're in right now. Take a moment. Matt says, I'm an hour behind, but great show so far. Welcome, Matt. You'll see this in an hour. I hope you're still with us in an hour, because it did get a little bit heavy. But that's where we are right now with respect to inflation, rising prices and price inflation. It's because of actual inflation that no one's talking about. They're not talking about because they don't want it fixed. They don't want it fixed because they don't want their toys taken away. If you take away the ability to print money, why would anyone vote for Bernie Sanders? Right? If you can't spend money you don't have as a politician, what power do you have? That's what they want to do. They want power. And of course, no one wants to have this conversation about printing money, about inflating the money supply. And they don't have to anymore because they've just changed the definition of inflation. They can talk about inflation all day when they're never actually talking about inflation, right? And everyone in the know knows. And the rest of you just, you're not supposed to know. You're not supposed to understand how this works. It's horribly complex, blah, 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 blah. I don't think it's that complex. I know I just talked probably for an hour about just the Fed and what it means. But, it's worth taking an hour class in, this is how the puppet masters are manipulating the economy that you live in. This is why prices go up. This is how they're screwing you over. It's important to understand. It's important to understand. All right. I promised you boobs. Well, a discussion about boobs. Let's be clear. We're going to have a discussion about fake boobs. We're done with the Fed. That's all I want to say about the Fed. I want people to understand it. Understand what's happening. And I'm not going to prognosticate, but it's not over. This raising of the interest rate. I am going to prognosticate. I shouldn't prognosticate, but I am going to. This raise. Oh, by the way, when they say they're going to raise, what I should explain this. When Jerome Powell said he's going to raise the Fed funds rate, they're raising the target Fed funds rate. They can't directly raise the Fed funds rate. That's why he says it's the target rate. What he's signaling is this is the rate we want you banks to charge each other for borrowing money to meet your Federal Reserve requirements. We're going to sell or buy other assets and use our other levers to try and get you to do that. So they can't directly set it, but banks kind of fall in line. They can set the discount rate. If they want to just change the discount rate, they could. I'm not actually 100% sure why they're not changing the discount rate. I'm sure there's some reason. But that's what's going on. And I don't think we are out of the woods by any means. And I without being an economist, my argument for that is we printed too much. We printed more than we have in history. A little bit of rate increases for a year isn't going to solve the problem, right? This is going to hurt. It's going to hurt for longer. I think the Fed's probably going to come back and go, gee, it's still not working. That's my prediction. I guess we need some more suffering. Because they're just doing what they know how to do. And I don't think they have the cojones to do what actually would be needed, which is to pull all that money back out of the economy. Right? Like, boom. They're not going to do that. They're going to take these little steps, and they're going to wonder why these little steps aren't working enough. They're not working enough because you printed way more than those little steps are pulling back. That's my prediction. I'm just an engineer. What the hell do I know? All I know is that momentum is mass times velocity. So, okay, now let's talk about fake boobs. This is a question. Oh, Richard Pett says, don't I mean knockers? Is that a Canadian thing, Richard? I don't know. I mean knockers, sure. I'm going to read this question comes from Mr. Dill McRelish Pickleford. He's not actually anonymous. I know who he is, but I won't out him. But he likes to call himself Dill McRelish Pickleford. So he writes to me. But also, I don't understand the healthcare system. Something seems fucked, but I don't know the solutions. If you depress doctor wages by socializing, then you get worse doctors and less doctors. But does the world really need more fake tit doctors? Maybe. They've gotten really good at them. Maybe an episode about fake tits, not sure. All right. I'm not going to do a whole episode about that. Okay. Does the world need more breast augmentation physicians? Look, if fake tit doctors are a byproduct of the free market, then yes. Then we do. Absolutely. If they're a byproduct of the free market. Because what we need is a free market. We need a free market in healthcare. And I don't really care how many, butt implantation or liposuction or fake boob doctors happen to be a byproduct of free market healthcare. I don't actually think we'd have more. Because they're already in a more free market, which we'll talk about in a minute, because you can't pay for, I don't think you can pay for your boob jobs with your insurance money. Maybe if you had a mastectomy or something, but generally you can't. And we have nothing close to a free market in healthcare. So when you say it seems something's effed, but I don't know the solutions, part of me is kind of surprised that he said this, because I know this guy, and I'm like, well, what do you mean? Of course something's effed. What are you talking about? The government is deeply intertwined with the healthcare industry. We are in the process of full socialization. We're not quite there yet to single payer or like full socialized medicine in the US, but we will get there. Absolutely we'll get there. Because the conservatives never roll anything back. So the best they do is like, let's not go quite this fast, guys. They'll get there. Right? We'll get there. And he's saying it seems effed. Well, look, man, seems can be measured. Let's take a look at it. We can measure. It doesn't just seem, it's measurably screwed. Here's an example of a measurement. Here is, just found this online randomly, cumulative percent change since December 2007 in healthcare prices. And GDP deflator. I don't know why they want the GDP deflator on there. I guess it's fun to have both. But this is showing you what how healthcare prices have changed since 2007 relative to, so healthcare prices are this blue line, and it's how they've changed relative to how prices have changed. So if there's a gap between these, like there is for most of this graph, it means that healthcare rates are rising higher than inflation. Basically, that's what they're looking at here. For those of you listening, around when this starts in 2007, remember Obama is elected in 2008, the end of 2008, gets into office 2009. One of his main promises is Obamacare, universal health care or whatever, some healthcare reform. You'll see that prior to his election, the healthcare price and the inflation were rising about the same. We're right on top of one another. He gets elected, and right at the end of 2008, it looks like November 2000. It looks like it's perfect, but I don't know. Right there, boom, the healthcare prices start to take off, possibly in anticipation of something, relative to inflation. And of course, Obamacare doesn't come into effect until 2010. But by 2010, you've got healthcare going up 6% and inflation 2.5%. So you've got that gap established. And that gap has continued consistently all the way until the end of this graph, which looks like it's the end of 2018. I don't know I think it's probably worse now. I don't know. But I'll just read this little blurb at the bottom of this random webpage here, healthsystemtracker.org. Since the end of 2007, healthcare prices have grown 21.6%, while prices in the general economy have grown 17.3%. So healthcare prices are growing faster than everything else. Why? We could do an entire series on government involvement in healthcare, which I'm not going to do, but we're going to go really quickly through. When you talk about an industry like healthcare, you've got to divorce yourself from the idea that the free market is involved basically in any way. It's almost unrelated. It's socialized almost completely. And what's not socialized is like cronyized. It's not a free market by any means. I mean, even physician licensing and pharmaceutical, like only pharmacies can fulfill prescriptions for certain drugs, and only physicians that are registered can write the prescription. Even that is not free market. And that's been going on since the 1800s when states started passing laws about medical licensing and physicians being able to write, only I guess pharmaceuticals maybe came in the late 1900s. I think in 1905, the AMA was like, they had the kind of a voluntary means of controlling the drug marketplace, but that eventually, got rolled into the FDA in 1906, or what the precursor to the FDA. So the government's involved even just on the level of like, who can give you Tylenol with codeine, right? And who can, like, just simple stuff. They're involved. Who can perform a procedure? Government's involved, right? Okay. Insurance regulation, an obvious one, right? First of all, why do we have all this health insurance? Well, that's partly the government's, but we can get there. Like, look, insurance regulation generally, thanks to Obamacare, there's now an employer mandate. That's called intervention, serious intervention. There's an employer mandate, and thanks to Obamacare, insurance companies can't charge for pre-existing conditions. I've got to have insurance that covers things that I will never use. And I'm going to be subsidizing people that have problems that I would like. It can't be individualized anymore, so there's no incentive I might as well be diabetic, right? I mean, I don't want to be diabetic for other reasons, but I'm going to it's socialized. That's why I'm saying we're very close to complete socialized medicine at this point. The Stabilization Act of so FDR is responsible for a lot of this crap. The Stabilization Act of 1942, thank you, FDR. He froze wages and salaries because free markets suck and he's a commie or dictator. Actually, he's more of a fascist. FDR was a fascist. You heard it here. He's a fascist he decided to freeze wages and salaries. Well, what during the wage freeze, healthcare benefits were exempted. So what did employers do? Employers were like, well, we need to hire people. We need to attract good people. We're not allowed to offer more money. Oh, we'll give them more healthcare. We're allowed to give them more healthcare. Great. So the government created this, like, you don't have is your car insurance tied to your job? Why the hell is your healthcare tied to your job? Does that make any sense? It makes zero sense. Why your employer and, your venereal disease that you've got are related. Like, why are those two things related? I don't know what people got. Like, why is your employer involved in this? Government. That's why. Government. That's why your employer is involved in it. Stabilization Act was just one of the things. And so now the government also has a bunch of programs. They've got Medicare programs, which is the retirement health care. So the entire Social Security system. Thank you again, fascist FDR. Thank you again for the Social Security system. The guy was like a king for over a decade or whatever. Okay, he gives us Social Security. Now we get Medicare, retirement health care. The government now also has Medicaid for low-income people. All this stuff gives the government massive leverage as a buyer to like throw their weight around and require companies different, like, to say nothing of all the state regulations, right? You can't get, health insurance doesn't cross state lines. Like, you can't offer plans in one state. And like, the whole thing is a mess. It's not a mess because of the free market. Buying an iPhone isn't a mess. It's horribly complicated. It's not a mess. It's really hard to make an iPhone. It's not a mess. You can go to the Apple Store. You can buy one online. There's plenty of ways to get it. The end. If you just smartphone market generally, you can choose from Samsung or Apple or like, okay, fine. Like, it's pretty easy. Prices seem to be going down. Quality's going up. Prices are kind of staying the same and quality's going up in with the iPhone in particular. But a lot of stuff like prices are going down, quality's going up. Welcome to the free market. That's how the free market works. It doesn't work that way in healthcare because it's nothing related to a free market. If you want healthcare to be cheap, if you want healthcare to be awesome and cheap and innovative, you need a free market. If you want it to be the DMV, vote for Obamacare again and complain about how you want the government to be involved because damn them pharmaceutical companies and damn the healthcare companies. Yeah, they are behemoth jerks. Yes, but it's because they're in bed with the government. Because they have to be. They have evolved into lobbying firms because the government's in control of their entire industry. If all they're good at is lobbying and getting favors from the government, the minute there's a free market, they'll go out of business or they'll be forced to change. Because we don't want to pay for that crap. I don't want to pay for, let's say, abortion. I'm never going to have an abortion. My wife is never going to have an abortion. I don't need health insurance that covers abortion. I don't need to pay for it. The end. Right? I don't know if abortion is covered by health insurance. I'm just choosing an extreme example. But like, there's plenty of stuff like I don't need health insurance that will cover diabetes, actually. I never plan on getting diabetes. I'm not pre-diabetic. I know the process to become diabetic, and I don't plan on doing that. So I don't need that covered. Probably need cancer covered. Like, there's certain things. Like, the free market just isn't working because it's not being employed. There's no free market here. And this is what you get when you have a moral hazard of a third party paying for something, by the way. Because you don't pay for your stuff directly. I had, several years ago, I broke my collarbone and punctured a lung. That's a separate story. I didn't realize I had done it, but I broke my collarbone. Eventually figured out that that's why it was hurting, thanks to some X-rays, and I didn't have health insurance at the time. So I was like, well, I'm gonna have to pay. I had to pay a sports doctor person to, like, he was like an orthopedic, I don't know, open me up, stick my collarbone, not my shoulder, my collarbone. Stick my collarbone together. He put some titanium screws and a plate in to hold the collarbone there. And so I'd pay out of pocket. It was like, I think it was like $8,000 or $9,000, right? I know it sounds like a lot, but it was like $30,000 when they thought I was going through insurance. And I and I was like, well, I'm not going through insurance. I'm going to write you a check. I'm not going to go through insurance. Oh, wait, I need to get out the different price list. Like, oh, really? That's how things work? I mean, if you've ever had to pay out of pocket for stuff, you realize that. Now, 8K is probably still too high. In fact, I was shocked at how like you pay for the operating room by the minute, which is crazy. But regardless, the system's not a free market at all. And one way you can look at that and see that is through there are some medical procedures that aren't covered by healthcare, and you can see how their price has changed in relation to other prices for things that are covered. And you can see how the government involvement in the health insurance industry has bloated prices. So, as an example, we can look at an appendectomy, like a laparoscopic appendectomy, which is very common, versus something like LASIK. Appendectomies are covered, LASIK isn't. In 1998, LASIK cost about $2,500 per eye. It still costs, I think, about $2,500 per eye. But because of inflation, that's really like $550 or $1,000 in 1998 dollars. Like, it doesn't cost the same. It costs the same in numbers, but it doesn't really cost the same in real dollars. It's gone down. And there's a whole bunch of other options. You can like PRK, and there's LASIK and all this other stuff. Similar costs. So if you want to get your eyes corrected, it's not even a completely free market, but the freer market has maintained pretty good prices. While inflation has gone up, their prices have been staying. Tech's gotten better. More options. Not so bad. Meanwhile, an appendectomy, I think it's the opposite. You've seen the price increase. We just showed you the chart, and that chart was only from 2007. I think it was even lower before then. When that appendectomy fits in that general healthcare cost thing, right? So that price has gone up. I did look just for the sake of Dill McRelish Pickleford. I did try and look up because I made the sacrifice. I made the sacrifice here, and I wanted to look up the price of breast augmentation surgery and what's happened. And I Googled breasts all day long. I mean, I put some effort into it, and the results are inconclusive. I'm going to have to keep researching. But from what I can tell, there's actually not a lot of, in all seriousness, there's not actually a lot of data on that. I can't find it. But from what I can tell, the cost hasn't really changed much since 1990. And there's been a significant rise in demand. So I can't totally tell. But I don't think that surgery has suffered the same rise in healthcare costs that like an appendectomy or anything else has. Because it also is outside, just like LASIK, it's outside for the most part, it's outside the insurance system. So, look, if you love the DMV, like I said, you'll love government healthcare. So that's the answer. Dill McRelish Pickleford. That's the answer. Yeah. Why does it seem? It seems effed up. Of course it does. I can't believe that you even say that. Of course it seems effed up. It is effed up. And note to people who live in places with socialized medicine, who are usually super obnoxious on this subject, and they're like, "It's great here." It's like, yeah, I don't know. I talked to people who had like serious problems and had to leave because the wait list was too long to get real health care because they were going to die. So maybe if you scrape your knee, it works pretty well for now, which we'll get to. But like, it's not actually. Stop saying it's awesome. It's not. It's not awesome because there's like people need to leave. People leave Canada to come to the U.S. to get cancer treatment because they can't wait on the waiting list. So don't pretend like you can't just ignore those deaths and be like, oh, it's great here. No, it's not great there. This is why people travel to free, but sometimes they go to Asia because there's parts of Asia where there's like less regulation and there's cheaper healthcare in Asia or whatever. I mean, there's probably also parts where it's subsidized, but look at Alfie Evans. Go tell Alfie Evans' parents in the UK that socialized healthcare is great. I don't know if you remember that story. He's a kid. He was like under 2 years old. Now, granted, the doctors may have been right about this, but that's not the point. He was like brain dead, basically. They wanted to take their baby, their little baby boy, who was being on life support. They wanted to take him out of the country on their own dime. They wanted to take him out of the country and see if doctors somewhere else could do something. Now, the doctors in the UK said, no, they can't, blah, blah, blah. Maybe they're right. It looks like they probably were right. Probably he couldn't be saved, and he was already had enough, brain damage or whatever that he was irrecoverable, right? But that's not the point. The point is they weren't allowed to. The point is the government said, no, that's socialized healthcare. You may not. We own your body. We own your son's body. Screw you. You can't go to another place. I mean, that story makes my blood boil, right? And the other thing I'll say about socialized medical systems is you are leeches. You are leeching off of the free market in terms of innovation, because innovation happens in a free market and it doesn't happen as quickly. You don't have as many chances. You don't have the profit incentive. You don't get as much innovation outside of a free market. And so all you socialized countries with socialized medicine, you are leeches. You are leeching off of the free market, which is producing innovation. You couldn't exist without the innovation of a free market. You wouldn't have the things that you have without the innovation of a free. And we don't even have a free market. We have a freer market in many ways. We don't even have a free market. And that transition between a free market or a freer market and socialization, you actually can last for a little bit in that, because you've got, it's the same as communism. When you first transition to communism, there's still grain in the silos, so you can still eat. And then you run out of grain and you realize you shot all the people who know how to grow food, and you're like, oh, oops. That's what happens with same thing. I mean, it's not the exact same thing, but it's the same principle. When you move from a free market in healthcare or a freer market and you socialize healthcare, you got doctors who are trained in the free market. You've got businesses that were started in the free market. You've got there's a lag. There's a long lag before the reality of a kid growing up in socialized medicine, deciding to get into the medical industry and getting into the medical industry. Like that whole cycle happens, and by the time he grows up and becomes a doctor, he sucks. So Dill says he doesn't know the solutions. Yeah, you do. You absolutely know the solutions. Free market is the solution. You don't have to be able to predict the exact mechanism. You couldn't have done that if I asked you in 1980 what cell phones were going to look like 40 years later. You wouldn't have been able to predict how they would be made and what the supply chain would be like and the complexity of the internet and all that. Like, of course not. But you could easily have said, well, I know what's good for the cell phone industry. Free market. Same thing. Right? And people will say, yeah, but healthcare is important. I agree. Healthcare is critically important, which is exactly why the government shouldn't be involved in healthcare. Eating is important. Do you want them to be feeding you and growing? You want them to control the food industry? By the way, if you want to eat the bugs, vote for the government to control the food industry. You want the government to manage all farming, all the food industry, all the restaurants. All the restaurants are Taco Bell. Is that what you want? You want the food managed by the government? Food's important, right? What about love and marriage and sex? Those are important things, right? You want the government to regulate them? Do you want a sex quota? Do you want to find a spouse by filling out a form with your government-mandated relationship insurance agency? The fact that it's important is why the government shouldn't do it. And the argument that, well, some people won't be able to afford it. Yeah, I know. That's called life. Some people afford better looking spouses than other people. Life is not, life's not equal. Making everyone equal is unfair. Go read Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut. There's only one way to make people equal. Equal's unfair. You don't want equal. Stop being jealous that some billionaire can spend $1 billion on, to cryo freeze himself if he gets stage 4 cancer and wait for a cure, and you can't. Yeah. He can do a lot of things you can't. Who the hell cares? He's not doing it at your expense. It's not a win-lose economy. So get over yourself and recognize the free market is better for you and better for everyone. And first adopters, the rich in the free markets, are often first adopters, right? They're the ones that try products that are new, maybe unstable, maybe super expensive. And if they work, the price goes down, and they can be popular and the price goes down. That's what happens, right? When I was growing up, only wealthy people could have car phones. No one had a car phone. Now welfare recipients have iPhones. It's ridiculous, right? That happened because of first adopters. We would never be there today if the government was like, well, everyone ought to have a car phone. We should take over the industry. You know, would all have phones this big that are like mounted in the back seat with a cord, and there'd be no internet. Like, you can't get equality and progress, and you can't get equality and justice. Those two things, you can't get it. People aren't equal. You want progress, you need innovation, you need differences, you need people trying things, you need people being able to succeed, and other people fail. Like, that's what you need. You want justice, you can't have equality. I don't mean equality under the law. I mean, like, equity, right? You can't do that. So get over it. Start advocating for the free market in healthcare. Stop pretending like, I don't understand how it wouldn't work. Yes, you do. I don't understand what to do with healthcare. Yeah, you do. Free market. Same thing you do with everything. It's not that complicated. Stop pretending it's more complicated than that. By the way, my scolding tone is directed specifically at Mr. Dill McRelish Pickleford, not at everyone else. I'm scolding him because he knows. All right. I'm going to look for some super chats here. Richard Petz returns with super chats. Richard Petz says, here's another couple bucks. Oops, wait, why isn't it on screen? Here we go. Here's a couple other bucks to your new Drop ESG effort, Carter. Oh, thank you. I will talk about that next. That's the last thing we'll do, and then we'll go. G-Man says, did you hear about the government-assisted suicides in Canada going up the last couple of years? I haven't, but here we go. See, this is the kind of winky wanky woo. You have examples of the NHS bad, but I have examples of it's good. Okay, it's immoral. It's bad in many cases. I'm sure it's good for some people. Sure, everything's good. Look, some people do better under socialism, but as a whole, we don't. And the free market is what's necessary for innovation. And you guys in the UK are leeches. You're leeching. Your healthcare system leeches innovation. I'm sorry, and I'm not gonna retract that. You leech innovation. That's what you do. Okay. I'm gonna talk about ESG really quickly. This show's been longer than I intended. So I mentioned this last week. I mentioned this when we were not on our main channel because of a ban. So I just want to quickly mention it again so that you guys can hear about it. I don't know if it's worth making an evergreen video about ESG generally. I might. But like I said, I mentioned this. There's a website. I'll pull it up. I started this website. This is based on what you guys actually wanted. We had this conversation a while ago. You guys gave me some homework to do. And I finally started doing the homework. I didn't complete it. So you can go to dropesg.com, and it will redirect to this website, which is just our one. It's a page on Unsafe Space. It will redirect to this website, and we're putting together divestment letters. If you want to divest from a company that supports ESG, the environmental, social, and governance framework, the scores that are being pushed by World Economic Forum and others, we've got divestment letters. You can click on one of these. So we have two things. We're going to fill out. First of all, we have a list of all the World Economic Forum companies that are participating. You can look at that list here. Right now, I'm working on taking this list and making divestment letters for each specific company. So Amazon's got one. I think if I click on it, you probably won't see it unless I switch the share screen. But here, I'll switch the share screen for a second. So if you want to divest from Amazon, you click on that link. It's got the Amazon contact information. It's got a letter. You just fill in these couple things. You sign it. It tells you who to email if you want. And you can let companies know why you are divesting from them and how it's related to ESG. So that list is under development, or the set of letters is under development right now. So as you'll see from this website, I don't have all of them, but we're starting. And for the ones we don't have, there is a general form letter. There's a generic one you can click on here, and you can fill in stuff yourself. So what we're doing right now is we're working there's a channel in our Discord. There's a channel, a Drop ESG channel, and people are contributing to finding contact information for the companies in the World Economic Forum, so we can build out this list. And this is, we're looking for like investor relations contacts and that kind of stuff. So we'll put those, so we'll make special letters for each company. And we're also working on funds. So a lot of people have like 401ks or other retirement vehicles that are in the form of funds, and they want to write their fund manager and say like, divest from these companies, or I want these companies out of the fund, or I'm dropping the fund because of these companies, whatever it is. And we're going to start put those together as well for the major funds, Vanguard, Fidelity, all the major names. We're going to start to put those together so that you can do that. And then eventually we'll expand from beyond the World Economic Forum companies to just any company that's supporting the ESG stuff overtly. A lot of companies are roped into it, so you don't want to blame companies that are roped in, because you can get part of one of the insidious things about ESG is it's got a built-in mechanism for punishing companies who don't spread the ESG framework to their people that they do business with. So you don't want to rope in ones that are kind of doing it because they have to. But there are other companies that are pushing it and just aren't members of the World Economic Forum. So we'll get those. And then my long-term plan is to actually introduce an alternative to ESG, which is basically an anti-ESG score, which is really more along the lines of promoting liberty and individualism, right? Not doing ESG stuff. So I haven't finished developing that yet. But that's the long-term plan. If you want to get involved in any of that, just get on our Discord server. Someone complained earlier our Discord link wasn't on our website. That is true. You can only get on the Discord server if you are a subscriber. If you're a paying subscriber, $1 a month, you can get on the Discord server. And when you do that, you should get an email or contact or whatever, depending on the platform. Sometimes it's hard to reach out. But you can always, if you are a paying member, you can always reach out to speak@unsafespace.com and just say like, hey, this is me, this is my ID, I need into the Discord server. All right. I think that's it. This is a long show. It's longer than 2 hours, so we should wrap it up. As a reminder, I don't see any new chat things. Microsoft is in there. Greg says Microsoft's got to be in there. I think they are on the World Economic Forum list. We don't have the list complete yet. So all right. As a reminder, we are trying to do kind of like a troublesome arguments thing. So in Discord, you can say, hey, here's some arguments that I'm having trouble refuting, or some arguments I'd like to make, but I'm having trouble articulating. And then we try and bring them into these shows sometimes and talk about them and see if we can arrive at some kind of answer or improvement in our thinking. That can be stuff like I'm wrong about something. That's fine. Like we'll work through that too. Also, people have been asking about a call-in show. I think maybe we'll try one next week if we get enough people saying they want to participate. I don't want to do a call-in show if people aren't prepared for it, because then it doesn't work. But if there's people that want to be in the call-in show, they want to call in, they want us to do. It's been a couple months, I think, so it's maybe time. Let us know in Discord, or just let us know on YouTube. You can comment on YouTube, say I want to do a call-in show, and we'll do a call-in show for the next Dangerous Thoughts, which is next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific. So, with that said, an enormous thank you to all of you who have been with me through this very dramatific discussion involving asteroids and rocks and rockets and old dictionaries and breasts. Let's see. Sorry, I just got to pull this up. So yeah, thank you so much for everyone who's been here. If you want to support the show, you can, or support the channel generally, go to unsafespace.com, get your name in the credits. With, I think it's $5 and up, you get your name in the credits. $25 and up, you get the grenade mug behind me. Your contribution, if you do join, does help, not just this show, like I said, but all the other shows. Rebel Civics, which earlier today, Keith had, I'm kind of compelled, but I like the thumbnail says, is Constitution Day constitutional? The short answer to his show is, But, so that's a good one. He does that, I think, almost every Wednesday as well, on Wednesday afternoon. Tuesdays, every other Tuesday, roughly, Alex Maselli hosts a show called 451 Degrees, which is about big tech and censorship. She talked about Twitter ban yesterday. She had a Twitter ban, and actually, I think she talked about our YouTube ban as well. On Mondays, we have Narrative Dissonance with me and Juliet Dillon, and this is where we host a panel of journalists to talk about the news, but from a what are we being lied to about, what are we being misled about. Last Monday, we had Emma Camp from Reason Magazine. This Monday, I think we have Brian McGlinchey from Stark Realities. I think he's our guest this Monday. And then Thursdays, tomorrow, we've got pop culture show called Token Minority Report with Beverly and Alex. So if you are a pop culture aficionado, or you just watch a lot of Netflix, way more than I do, join them for that. Also, roughly once a month, we do book club. The next book club is this Sunday, October 2nd at, I think it's noon Eastern. It's on our website. I think it's noon Eastern. The book is The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. That's hosted by me and Alex. And then one after that is August 30th, which is hosted by Juliet. And that's Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut. I mentioned Harrison Bergeron earlier. Another Kurt Vonnegut. That one's a short story. Slaughterhouse 5 is not a hugely difficult or intense book either. So the Satanic Verses is probably a little bit late to start unless you're going to do nothing but read between now and Sunday. But if you want to join, please do. You don't have to have read it. And the October 30th, you got plenty of time to read Slaughterhouse 5 before then. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great evening. And I will see you next time. Take care. Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. It would be better for your health if you forgot what you just heard. That should be easy for someone of your intelligence. The following co-conspirators are hereby ordered to watch CNN. Experts agree that 87,000 new tax collectors will make inflation feel like less of a problem. I think we can agree that the FBI's track record speaks for itself. If you think about it, only government-sanctioned experts should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.